Good morning, it's tubalcain. Welcome back to the channel, and this is tips number 530, and I'm beginning a series on the Mead belt sander, band sander. Now, you might have watched my complete series on this Kalamazoo type 2x48 inch. That begins with tips number 510. I'll put those numbers on the screen. There's 7 videos on that, but I'm moving on now to a smaller one, and this is one you probably cannot make, but what I'm doing is reconditioning or restoring this Mead band sander. This is the complete series of videos on the Kalamazoo belt sander. This is a Mead 1 inch by 42 inch band sander. And this entire video is going to consist just of me bloviating about this and the various competitors for this. So if you want to get into the actual rebuild, the restoration, watch the following one, 531. So this is just talking about this particular machine. I recently, when I was at ARNFEST, purchased this from a man. I knew the man, and it was, he had it marked $40. And I said, well, does it work? And he said, well, the motor smokes a little bit, but you can have it for $30. I said, well, I'll take it if you load it, and he did. And when I brought it home, I thought, well, I'll try plugging it in and see if it smokes. And he was right, it was smoking, but it was old enough to smoke. So I let it run for a few minutes, and the motor just smoked out. I didn't really care, but it will need a new motor. This is a quarter horse Westinghouse split phase motor, but it has an awful lot of end play. Sometimes excessive end play can cause the centrifugal switch to be inoperative, and possibly it's stuck in the starting cycle. I will take that apart and see if it's fixable, but I suspect that the starting windings are burnt. It does have a smell to it, and if it does, I'll pitch that motor and try to find another one. It is belt driven. Since it did run and then it smoked out, I thought, well, I bet it's the starting winding. So what I did to prove that is I just rope started it, you know, in one direction and then the other. And since it would start in either direction, I knew that the starting winding was burned out. So I did take it apart just to prove that, but who cares really. This is a little Westinghouse. It's seen better days. It's quarter horse, so that's really all I need for this is a quarter horse. I should talk about centrifugal switches and all that, but I guess I'm not going to. All right, the shiny copper here is the running winding, and the dull one here is the starting winding, and you can see that they're discolored, especially on this side. So that's burnt out. You can see it's all, the varnish is gone. So that's the problem, and these are never worth rewinding. It would cost hundreds to rewind that $40 motor. Well, what good are these little sanders? And they use a 1 by 42 inch belt, and I ordered those from KBC. They're only about $1.50 each, but I don't think you can buy them locally anymore. It seems like the competition now is making a 1 by 30 motorized type sander, but these were just beautiful for light work, polishing, but mainly deburring. So I think there were probably thousands of them in factories used for deburring, and they were made by the Mead company. The reason I bought this, I'm kind of sentimental about it. I had one at the high school. I probably bought it in about 1970. And it did not come with a motor, so I put it on the board. I made a switch just almost exactly like this and put an appliance motor on there. And the kids loved it, but the problem was I was teaching beginning metalworking, where I was trying to teach them to draw file and all the various hand operations, but they all would fight over using this, and then within minutes they would break the belt. So eventually I just had to give up, and I would break it out when I had a job to do and put a belt on. Then I would leave that belt on there, and then the next day it would be broken. And I just I used it for my own personal maintenance is what I did. But I had it there for many years. I don't know what happened. I suppose it got sold in the auction. Should this subject interest you at all, Google the words images Mead bandsander, and I don't know if that's one word or two words, and you will come up with hundreds of pictures of this bandsander. And before they came up with this rather cheaply made stamped sheet metal sander, they made one that was cast iron, so you'll see pictures of that too. But I think they came out with this in the late 50s or so, and probably sold a ton of them and were able to sell them fairly cheaply. But this came from Vintage Machinery. I printed this out, but here's the original paperwork that would have come with this. And notice that they show the motor kind of in the shadows because they did not supply it. So the one that I have here on the bench is missing parts, and I knew that. I knew that there should have been a work table. There should have been these extra small wheels, two of those, one, two. Those are missing. And all of the hardware to hold the table on, as well as this little swing arm here that holds those smaller wheels. So I'm going to make smaller wheels. I'm going to make a table. So this will all be part of this video series. So they even call it a burring machine here. Industry's tested tool, now available for the home workshop, as if it wasn't before, but they're, you know, telling it craftsmen, hobbyists, so on, and that it's good for profiling, shaping, grinding, sanding, polishing, buffing, burring, for wood, plastic, or metal. Fast. There's all of the little features of it. I just had a visitor here. Now, these are stink bugs, and they come in the house and the garage. I'm going to smash them in a minute here, but they just smell horrible. But we've been infested with them. Not so much in the house. I haven't seen one in the house in a long time. This is kind of interesting if you want to print that out and read it from Vintage Machinery. I'm not going to read that all for you. And this page shows you different ways of using it, but one of the features here is you can do inside sanding, and that is done by looping the belt around those little wheels. I never really used that feature, but it is something that might be kind of neat to use for certain applications, I suppose. This particular sheet is from before zip code days, as you can see here. Doesn't give you a zip code, so it would have been the late 50s or mid 50s, and it was available. Well, here's the specifications. It requires a 1/4 horse motor, and it was $25 without the motor. That's with oil light bearings. Now, if you wanted the ball bearings, and mine has the ball bearings, it's $34.50. It was also available with different platens. They call them backing plates or backstops there. But you could get round ones and different widths. You could also use the belts, narrower belts, and you would just rip these into whatever width you wanted. Start with 1 inch, you could rip them so they're 1/2 inch wide if you wanted. Now let me show you what the competition was doing at the same time. Bell Saw, later it was Foley Bell Saw, also made one, and it was so similar. I'm wondering if it was just a copy or sold under a different badge, but I had one of these for a while. It was on a sheet metal stand. I didn't like the stand because you kept tripping over the legs. They were flared out. But as I recall, this bell saw required a 1x44 inch instead of a 42 inch because they were trying to force you into buying their abrasives. However, you could use the 42 on it, but in order to do that, you just had to force this down and spring-load it all the way. You couldn't keep it in the raised position. So that was a dirty trick, I thought. But actually pretty well built. Again, with stampings, sheet metal stampings. Kalamazoo makes a 1x42 inch bandsander mounted right, again, on the motor. Similar to the 2x48. Now there's the Delta 1x42 inch, and you probably recognize that. It looks very similar, and the design is about the same. It came with the motor and with the base ready to plug in and ready to use, and they must have sold 1 million of those. Notice that that one has a cast iron table. I'm going to show you one that has, the more modern ones had a stamped, cheapened steel table. And it also had the extra wheels on there so you could do the internal type of sanding. Here's the Delta parts list, and it came with a shield, a belt guard. But these were flawed. They were a plastic wheel. All four wheels were plastic, and they had a urethane tire on them that was kind of tan in color. Now, as these aged, those wheels hardened, the tire hardened, and it would fly apart, and it would hit you in the face. But it wouldn't happen all at once. Usually bits and pieces came off over a period of time. And many people have these, including the one I'm going to show you from ARNFEST. They don't even realize that there was a tire on them, because now it's just a black molded wheel. So they should be ashamed of themselves. I hope they are. For that design flaw. But for a while there, I was even making castings for myself, because I owned several of these, and so did my brother. And I would machine the castings the same as, well, as I did in one of my other videos. I had a pattern for that at that time. So here I am at ARNFEST some time ago, and you can see that black wheel back there is missing the tire, and he's got this marked $197. And of course it didn't sell, so I'm loading it back up. But notice that this table is stamped sheet metal, it's not cast. So as they went along, they cheapened them. Delta I'm talking about now. Alright, let's talk about the Mead now. I think I beat this subject to death as far as the competitors are concerned. But these are die-cast wheels. They're zinc. You might call them pot metal. This one is attached right onto the shaft, and there's a couple of ball bearings inside here. You can't see them. Now the upper wheel, and that has a boss there with a set screw, and the wheels are crowned. Up on top there's a wheel, and that has ball bearings in it. Now remember, the cheaper one that I showed you in the literature there was just oil light bearing, like this smaller wheel. And this, all the bearings in here seem to be just fine. Maybe they've been changed at one time. They're sealed to keep the grit out. Up top side is a torsion spring, a lot like a mousetrap, kind of foolproof. As I spoke of before, these machines tended to self-destruct, and when used with a cheap open-face motor like this, you can see the amount of grit, and I've talked about this in other videos, and dust that was inhaled by the motor and would ultimately ruin the bearings and the motor itself. Not only that, but now take a look at this pulley. Now this is right in an area where the grit will fall, and the shape, see how deep this pulley is totally ruined. However, they're cheap enough, so who cares? But it's lost all of its shape and its form by the abrasives going through it, as compared to the pulley that was on the motor is still in pretty good shape. But that's how the pulley, how the belt should ride, not deep down in the groove. So that has to be replaced. This machine is mounted on some type of plastic. It's about 1/2 inch thick. It's not wood. I'm not really sure just what it is, but I'll clean that up and I'll probably reuse it. Now, as far as switches are concerned, I remember at the high school that I just put regular light switch in like this, and the grit would get in there and eventually destroy that as well. And eventually I went and I bought one of those switches that I guess you'd call them outdoor type switch with a die-cast base on it and everything. They were weatherproof and they would keep the grit out. They were meant to be used on garages and other outdoor applications. When I spin this shaft, it spins pretty freely, but I can hear just a little rubbing of those bearings. They probably should be replaced, but I won't use this much after I make it anyway. Look at this. I call this the platen. They call it the backing. It has slots on it, and so does the Delta, so that you could adjust it in alignment with the belt. And that's still usable, although it's got quite a bit of wear to it. You can see the crown on the wheels, probably a 1 or 2 degree crown. That's what helped track it. But not only that, the tracking mechanism on this Mead sander, as well as the Delta and the Bell Saw, and probably all the other brands, it works just by 2 screws here that work up against each other and cause this shaft to move one way or another. And then once you get that set, you don't have to do much with it anymore. But that is the tracking mechanism, if you want to call it a mechanism. And that's why this hole is slotted or elongated, to allow that shaft to move. There is a guard missing. And that's what this screw right here is. There was a little sheet metal guard. I think it even said Mead on it, possibly. I don't know if it was meant to keep the grit out of this or just to keep people from tampering with this, because you didn't want the operator or somebody who didn't know what they're doing messing with that. And this wheel, the bearings are okay. I don't hear them, but it's not spinning all that freely. This hole held a bolt, and then there was a bracket that went, and another little shaft that went up to that table that allowed the table to not only be held securely, but to set it at different angles. So that's the purpose of that hole. There may be times when you're using this and you're swinging a large piece of work around and it's interfering with the back part of the belt. That's the reason for putting one of the little wheels on that shaft. It just gives you more working room in here. I really never used that feature. This wheel is just held on with a little E-clip. Comes off real easily. And that's in very good condition. But one is missing. So I'm going to make a pair of them. I'll have to make a pattern and all of that. So that'll be part of the video. And then the shaft is missing right here. It won't be a threaded shaft. It'll be threaded in one end. And that wheel would mount there. And then, as I told you from the other picture, there's a missing arm here that held the other one, so that in effect, what you were doing here to do inside sanding was holding it like that. And I will make that arm as well, probably just out of bar stock. I'm not going to make a casting for one piece. Looking through the literature, I noticed that Mead called for a 3-inch pulley on the motor. Now that's just a 2-inch, and a 2-inch here. That would speed it up a little bit faster if you're using only a 1725 RPM motor. This is painted gray. The one I had at school was green, so I think I'll use that hammer tone green. And yes, I will paint this, believe it or not. I just examined the bearing in that upper wheel, cleaned it off real well, and that's the bearing number Nice 1614DS. I think that stands for double shield. I'd like to have or double seal. It's a metal shield, it's not the rubber, so I think I want to get the rubber. Now the purpose of this extension on the shaft here is for that little arm that will hold the extra wheel. You know, this is a bit of Sherlock Holmes here, but notice that at the bottom here, the pulley rubbed up against, and it's quite a deep groove, so there should have been a spacer washer there or something, or the pulley should have been mounted a little bit outboard. And there is a flat on there, but there is no keyway. Can you hear that? It's not bad. I don't know if it's worth replacing those and going to that effort. Well, that completes part 1 of this video series on the Mead belt sander. Hope you liked it and that it wasn't too tedious. Now as I get into part number 2, I'm going to start taking it apart, getting it ready for cleaning, and talk about some of the various parts that I'm going to need to make or rebuild or design or whatever, and see if I can come up with a motor. It only needs a 1/4 horse motor, so I'll see what I can find cheap or that I have laying around the house. Alright, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in part 2. So long for now.